Welcome to this episode of Photoshop for Beginners, and this time we're going to talk about selection tools, which are something that's very necessary if you want to do compositing in Photoshop. So let's get into it. Let's define what I mean by selection tools, and then I'll disappear from your screen and we'll carry on with an example here. So if I grab this toolbar over here, we have tools on here that will allow us to crop an image, and that's a form of selection because you're saying I just want a certain part of this image. I'm going to crop the whole image to that size. And we also have tools that are required in order to select parts of an image that you might want to then take and stick on top of another image, and we call that compositing. So let's have a look at crop tools first. So let's say I want to, first of all, move that away where it was before. Let's say I want to quickly just crop this pyramid. And you'll notice up here in the toolbar, we've got something called a rectangular marquee tool. Now, before we get into that, I'll show you there's a little flyout there. It's very hard to find sometimes, a little arrow. And you'll see that there are other variants on this tool. Now I'll show you the elliptical tool in a second, but I don't find it particularly useful for what I do. So let's start with the rectangular marquee tool. Now this is one where you can just start, you click and drag until you get the particular shape you want. You can actually move that selection around a little bit if it's not quite to your liking. The problem is you can't resize this once you've unclicked it. You can still move it, but you can't resize it or change the aspect ratio or ratio of height to width sort of thing. So now once I've selected that, I could, if I wanted to crop this image, I could go up here in the drop down to image, crop, and there you go. Now if you see these crawling ants, as they're often called, which is a marquee, you can just hit Control D, and that will make those marks disappear, or those crawling ants disappear. So you can see over in the history here, I created a rectangular marquee. I moved it around, and then I hit crop, or went through image, drop down and hit crop, and then I deselected the marquee. So I can go back here anytime, just go right to the beginning and start again. And I'll show you another one here. I just touched on it a moment ago. Elliptical marquee tool. This one will allow you to make, you know, an ellipse or a circle, whatever shape you want to make. And let's say we just wanted to do this. We wanted to do something a little different with this part of the image. Now, if I went image, crop, this isn't really an appropriate cropping tool. You won't get a circular image. You'll get a rectangular image, of course, out to the edge of that marquee. So let's go back here and to move selection. I might want to do something like paint inside. So let's just say I'm going to take this paintbrush. You go up here, you notice up at in the options bar, I've set it the opacity to about 47%, so it's not a solid color. So if I actually go down here to these color patches for a moment, if I double click on that patch that's in the foreground, I can now move this scale anywhere I like and choose a new color. Let's say I choose a light mauve or whatever. I could now take the paintbrush that you see in the toolbar here, and I might want to make a larger brush out of this. So there's a pull down up here on the options bar, drop down I should say. I got to get my terminology straight, and I could start painting, and you notice that the painting that I'm doing is constrained just within that selection. So that's basically what simple selection tools are used for. So apologies for cutting off the menu bar earlier. I mentioned that when you used this Marquee tool, you could go to Image and then Crop. That's where it came from. It wasn't visible in that earlier screen. So we got that fixed now, I hope. Now, as I said, the Marquee tool is not a particularly versatile crop tool. So if we go down here, we've got another flyout. We have crop tool, perspective, crop tool, slice tool, and so on. But the main one here is the crop tool itself. And so let's just start creating a crop area here. Now you notice up here I've got up in the top left on the option bar 2:3. That's the original ratio of this original picture. So if I drag the corner, it's going to maintain that aspect ratio. So with any of these things, if you with the crop tool, once you've finished making your selection, you have to hit enter in order to implement it. So there it is. So if we go back in our history here, just open up again, and I could also choose up here in the top left, I could choose width by height resolution. What that allows me to do is use an aspect ratio other than what my original image was shot in. As you can see, I can change the height without changing the width, and vice versa. So that's again implemented by hitting enter once you've made your selection. Let's go back. There is, for instance, if you're shooting for television, for YouTube, whatever, you might want to use 16:9. So that would make whatever your selection is here. Let's bring that down. Again, the aspect ratio is maintained, but now it fits a television screen. So again, hit enter, and there you go. Now there is another tool in here called, if we can get the flyout to work here, perspective crop tool. This is where you start doing some funky stuff with it. So if we just outline our area that we want to crop, and let's say we started dragging a corner like that, and then hit enter. So now it's actually changed the perspective on the image that we've cropped. So let's just try that again, do something a bit more extreme so it becomes more obvious. So if I were to drag this corner down like this, and then hit enter, you can see it does some pretty weird stuff. Not something I'd use too often, but you can also do things like this in the transform tools, which I'll talk about in another video. So let's go back for a moment to our regular crop tool. And just something I thought I'd show you here. Once you make your selection, again, I'm in 16:9 rather than 3:2 here, it doesn't matter. Let's say your horizon didn't look straight. It's not so obvious in this particular example. Let's widen it out a little bit. But they do give you a grid on the crop tool here. So if you hover your mouse over the corner, as you can see in the top left corner here, I can now rotate the whole thing and then can use that grid. Let's line it up with the bottom of the pyramid here. So that would make the pyramid straight on our end crop here. So at this point, we've talked about how you can crop an image. That is, select a rectangular area and reduce the total picture down to just that one area that you've selected. If you want to now go on to doing something called compositing, which is where you might take an image from another, or part of an image from another photo, and drop it into, say, this image, then you'll need to use some more refined selection tools. So let's have a look up here. We've got, we're going to start with this one called a Lasso Tool. And as you'll see from the flyout, if I can get it working here, you have a Lasso Tool, and you have a Polygonal Lasso Tool, and a Magnetic Lasso Tool. And I'll show you how each of those works. I tend not to use those very much anymore, but anyway, we'll just give them their due here. So let's say with the lasso, I can just circle an area, let's say, that I want to feature. When I let go, it will create this crawling ants surround around the area. Now, if I go back, go to the toolbar here and use the Move tool, I can actually take that selection out. Not very useful, leaves this gaping hole. So let's go back to the previous step. And I'm going to talk about layers in another tutorial on compositing, but let's just have a look here. I can go under Layer, New, and then there are these two things here, Layer via Copy or layer via Cut. If I say Cut, it's going to literally cut out that lassoed area, but I'm going to start with Layer via Copy. And you notice over here in the Layers panel, it's actually created another layer, and you can see there's a little dot there that represents this area. So if I take my Move tool, and I'm in that layer 1, I can now drag it out. So you can see that I can just create a duplicate. Now you'd have to obviously blend this area in, but I can do some funny things with duplicating an image several times in another image if so desired. But that's not what I desire to do. So I'm going to show you the next tool here. The next one, once this flies out, is called a Polygonal Lasso Tool. And this tool is probably more useful for things like, you know, the pyramid here, where you've got a very defined area that has straight edges. So the way it works, it's almost like, you know, taking some needle and thread, and you click in points where you want the thing to change direction. And I'm not going to be totally accurate here, especially when I come down in this area. I'm not going to go around each of these steps. I'm just going to click here, go over here, down here, here. So as you can see, this tool is good if you've got a very well regular shaped area and you want to highlight it. So in order to finish this, I have to come back to the beginning point, and then it creates this crawling ants thing. Now there's one other tool I'm going to show you briefly, and it's not something I use very often, so I wouldn't worry about it too much, but it shows you by going down here to the bottom, nearly the bottom of the toolbar. You'll see it flies out with a message saying Edit in Quick Mask Mode. So if I click that, suddenly I get this red area around my selection. So it shows me, it's just an aid to show me what I've selected. And this is kind of it's been in Photoshop for many, many years, and it's kind of a throwback to the old printing days when they used to use ruby lith film to separate elements of an image. So now you can see these steps here were not properly selected. So I can actually refine my selection a bit by going to a brush tool, which is over here. And if I have this right, I'll select the black. And if no, that's the wrong one. So I've got to go use the white patch. Yep, the white patch, that's correct. And I might change the size of the brush here, but as you can see, I can now I can now paint in those steps in that quick mask, as it's called. And if I were to shut off the quick mask, now it says Edit in Standard Mode, which gets rid of that ruby lith thing. And you can see indeed it has created these, or it's followed the steps on the pyramid a little bit better. Also in that same group, if we get the flyout again, you'll see there's a magnetic lasso tool. Now this used to be one of my go-to selection tools, and it's I no longer use it because there's a much better one called a quick selection tool. We'll get to that one in a bit. But the way this works is, I think it's looking for distinctive transitions between two parts of a scene. So for instance, if I click here, wherever that little black arrow lands, it will know that there's an edge here and a sky, and you see it's not doing a exactly a terrific job of finding that. So, but it used to be somewhat helpful when you're taking a complex, regular shaped kind of structure like this and trying to follow along. I'm just clicking along the edge here, and it's supposed to kind of find that edge for itself, as it does to an extent. And if I come around here to my beginning, it needs some refinement. Obviously, some things have gone wobbly, but you can see that it has somewhat followed the steps here on the pyramid, but it's not great. It's a lot of work because you have to clean up afterwards. So let's go back to the beginning again and look at the next group. As I said, Quick Selection Tool is now my go-to. It was introduced several years ago, and I've never looked back since. But there's another one here called Magic Wand that we should at least look at. It's not as good for, say, outlining something, a regular shape like this pyramid. But you'll notice if I click in this area here, that it's found similar texture within that same area, and it's saying, I think you want to highlight this whole area. So it's not perfect. And as you see, if we go in here, it's kind of picked up some other stuff as well. But again, it was at one point a useful tool that if you're trying to, let's pick this bloke down here. It's only picked up part of him, which is the white part on his shoulder. So it's helpful in some situations, but not perfect. So let's, again, wind back to the beginning. And finally, let's go to this flyout and pick our Quick Selection tool. Excuse me. And what I'm going to do now, I'm going to point you up to these three here. These are refinement tools for once you've created your selection. And these other ones, by the way, like for instance, magnetic lasso, it has the same kind of tools, but I don't find they work very well. So let's go back to the Quick Selection tool. Yeah, that one. And I'm going to pick this patch here. This is for a new selection. And you can change the size of the brush that you use to make this selection. We're going to stay with a small one, only 8 pixels here. And what I would recommend is if you're trying to go around a shape like this, start on the inside, not the outside, because it'll start picking up the entire sky and other things like the trees and so on. So if I start on the inside here and run it up along the inside again, get somewhat close to the edge, look at the job it's doing. It's marvelous. It's picking out all those edges. It's much better at recognizing a shape than any of the other tools, and it's created our crawling ants there. Now, you notice there's this little wart off to the side that it thinks is part of it. Just go up here to the top, click on the minus tool, and you can just run that along and it'll smooth that out. So that's definitely the best tool for selecting just about any kind of area. So the last thing I'm going to introduce you to in this tutorial is something called Select and Mask. And for that, I'm going to go over to a different picture here. Now, Select and Mask used to be called Refine Mask. So if you're dealing with an older version of Photoshop, you might see Refine Mask rather than Select and Mask. And where that's found, if you don't see a button coming up here on the options bar, you can always go Select, and down here Select and Mask. And again, it might say Refine Mask instead. It's the same thing. So if I zoom in on this little chickadee, no, that's going the wrong way, folks. So if I change this over, I can also use Control Plus to do the same thing. But let's go in a little closer to this bird. And let's say I just want to select this bird because I want to use it in a composite or composite somewhere else, like into another, drop it into another photograph. So I might start with my Quick Selection tool here. And I think I've got a fairly small brush, 8 pixels, and I'll run around the inside of the bird. And this doesn't always work perfectly, but but it's certainly a lot easier than using a lot of the other tools. So you notice here it did get fooled a little bit. It's incorporated some of the background because it thinks it's part of the same bird, with the way the bird's blended in there. So we can go to this minus tool again and start taking some of that out. Just sweep through it. And again, I'm using a very small brush here. And I'll probably lose some of the bird's feet here, but I can always go in and just do a plus thing here and restore some of that area where the bird's feet are. It doesn't have to be, this is just a demonstration at this point. So that's not too bad. I want to add a little bit more to the tail here as well. Maybe a bit too much to the tail. So I'm going to minus out some of that. And didn't do a perfect job there. So just build it back in again. And then we'll go to this. I'm going to get rid of that little extra bit here. And you'll notice, as I mentioned earlier, there's a button that may appear up here. If not, you can find it under Select. Select and Mask. But I'm just going to press this. And now I come into this other screen, and you'll notice I've got this checkerboard pattern, which is the transparent background. So if I went 100% transparent, all I'd see is the checkerboard and our little bird. But if I went the other way, I can start to bring in a bit of the background, just in case I need some reference, where the rest of his feet are, for instance. I can see he's got a couple of nails that are missing. Now over here, there's a set of tools, including, zoom in, zoom out. But a good old quick selection tool is still here as well. And if I wanted to add a little bit, I've now got a very small brush. It's only 9 pixels, as you can see up on the option bar. And I might want to, include that toenail and maybe some other parts back here. Maybe it's too much. So I can similarly go to the minus and start taking some stuff out here that I don't think belongs in here. It's kind of hard to tell, and they suddenly grab the whole foot, so that's not good. I'd have to go back and use the plus tool again to bring the foot back in. But this is, if this is a little touchy and you're not getting exactly what you want, once we get into compositing, which is in one of my other videos, you'll see how we can refine any selection like this even further using layer masks. But I won't talk about them in this particular tutorial. There's another one here called Refine Edge Brush Tool. And for things like, feathered birds and so on, it will give you a bit of an improvement. It's not necessarily going to work that well on this particular scenario, but you can kind of run it along the edge and it will supposedly pick out things like soft fur and so on. And it's probably improved it a bit there. But there's some other stuff over here. One called Smooth, which takes your selection. I'm going to actually, I'm going to actually take the transparency and kill it there so we can get a better idea what this does. If I hit Smooth or drag it up, you notice it starts to smooth out our selection a little bit because we're kind of, using a mouse to determine the edge, and it doesn't necessarily work that well, or accurately, I should say. There's another one, if you excuse the pun. I know this is a bird, but we'll use something called Feather. And Feather will, really soften that edge, maybe a little too much. So you use it with a bit of discretion, depending on the effect you want. And you can also do Shift Edge, which will either include more or include less to help you refine that selection that you have. And then for now, we're going to say output to selection, but you'll see here there's a drop down which gives you many more choices. You can put this bird on in a totally new document. You can put it on a new document with a layer and a layer mask, or just put it within the same document as a new layer with a layer mask, or just a new layer, or just add a layer mask to the layer that it was on when you started playing with it, which was the background layer. But for now, we're just going to say selection, and if I hit OK, you'll see my selection is showing up there. If I like this selection, and realistically, I'd probably minus out this seed that he's got in his beak, just get the bird with its beak open. I can actually, if I want to ever come back to this, I can go under Select, and down here, Save Selection. And I can give it a name. I'll just call it Bird for now. And you notice here it says it's going to create a new channel. Okay, so if I look at the Channels panel, which I can get to from Window, Channels, indeed, and apart from the normal red, green, and blue channels that comprise a picture, it's created this one called Bird. So if I didn't like that, I can always go down here to the garbage can and just delete it. As long as it's highlighted, I could delete it, but I'm not going to at this point. So let's go RGB again. So let's say I temporarily got rid of this selection. I wanted to come back to it. If I hit Control D, it will get rid of the crawling ants. And now I can go up to Select, Load Selection, and I can choose Bird. Obviously, that's the only extra channel I've created. Say OK, and it's back again. Are you still awake? Surprised I haven't put you to sleep yet. Thanks for watching this. If you found it useful and you're still awake at this point, please give it a thumbs up and definitely subscribe. I'd appreciate that. And hit that notification bell if you want to see more in this series.